The dusty stranger who rode into Hamilton, Montana in the spring of 1878 was barely clinging to her horse, half-starved and sunburned, wearing clothes that hung off her like they belonged to someone twice her size. Warren Fletcher was mending a fence post when he first saw her riding up the long stretch of road that led past his ranch. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, squinting against the afternoon sun. The figure swayed dangerously in the saddle, and Warren dropped his tools and started running before his mind fully processed what he was seeing. By the time he reached the edge of his property line, the horse had stopped of its own accord, and the rider was sliding sideways. Warren caught her just before she hit the ground. She was lighter than she should have been, all bones and angles. Her face was burned raw from the sun, lips cracked and bleeding, brown hair matted with dust and sweat. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23 years old, and she was barely conscious. "Easy now," Warren said, his voice rough from a day of working alone. "I have got you." Her eyes fluttered open. They were the color of slate before a storm, gray and fierce even in their exhaustion. She tried to speak, but no words came out, just a dry rasp. Warren lifted her carefully and carried her toward the house, calling out for his ranch hand, Miguel, who emerged from the barn looking startled. "Get water and some broth if there is any left from dinner. This woman is half dead from thirst and starvation." They got her inside and onto the spare bed in the small room off the kitchen. Miguel brought water and Warren lifted her head gently, letting just a few drops pass her lips at first. Too much too fast could be dangerous. She coughed, sputtered, but her throat worked, swallowing. "More," she whispered. "Slow," Warren said. "You will make yourself sick." Over the next hour they got water and then thin broth into her. Color began returning to her face, though she still looked like something that had crawled through hell. When she could finally sit up a little, propped against pillows, she looked at Warren with those storm-gray eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I did not think I would make it to anywhere. I saw your ranch from the ridge and just pointed my horse toward it." "What happened to you?" Warren asked, sitting in the chair beside the bed. "Where did you come from?" Her face tightened and pain flashed across her features. It was not physical pain. Warren could tell that much. "My family had a homestead 3 days northwest of here. Had, past tense." Warren waited, giving her space to continue. "Disease came through in winter. Took my mother first, then my father and my younger brother. I buried them all myself." Her voice was flat, emotionless, but Warren could hear the grief underneath, heavy as stone. "I tried to keep the homestead going through spring, but I could not manage it alone. The crops failed. The well went dry. I sold what livestock I had left for supplies, but the money only lasted so long. I thought I could make it to Hamilton, find work, start over." She looked down at her hands, raw and blistered. "I almost did not." "What is your name?" Warren asked quietly. Faye Richardson." "Well, Miss Richardson, you made it. You are here now and you are safe." Warren stood, feeling suddenly awkward. He was a man used to solitude, to the company of horses and cattle and the occasional ranch hand. Conversations like this, with emotions running close to the surface, made him uncomfortable. But he could see the desperation in her eyes, the fear of what came next. "You can stay here until you get your strength back. I've got a spare room, as you can see. It is not much, but it is clean and dry." "I cannot just stay here without paying my way," Faye said, trying to sit up straighter and wincing at the effort. "I will not be a charity case. You are in no condition to do anything right now except rest and eat. Once you are back on your feet, if you want to help around the ranch, I will not stop you. Lord knows there is always more work than hours in the day." Warren moved toward the door. "For now, just sleep. We will figure out the rest when you are not half dead." He left her there and went back outside, but his mind stayed in that small room. The haunted look in her eyes followed him through the rest of his chores. Over the next few days, Faye proved to be a stubborn patient. Warren would find her trying to get up and help with tasks before she had the strength for them. On the third day, he caught her in the kitchen attempting to cook breakfast, swaying on her feet like a sapling in a strong wind. "What did I tell you about resting?" Warren said, taking the pan from her hands before she dropped it. "I have rested. I feel fine." But even as she said it, she had to grip the edge of the table for support. "You look like you are about to fall over. Sit down before you hurt yourself." Warren guided her to a chair and finished making the eggs himself. He was not much of a cook, but he could manage the basics. "You are no good to anyone if you collapse again." "I need to be useful," Faye said, and there was a tremor in her voice that had nothing to do with physical weakness. "I cannot just sit around. I need to do something, earn my keep. Otherwise, I am just a burden." Warren set a plate in front of her. "You are not a burden. You are a person who had some bad luck and needed help. There is no shame in that. You do not understand." Faye stared down at the eggs without eating. "I have been helpless for months, watching everything fall apart and not being able to stop it. I could not save my family. I could not save the homestead. I barely saved myself. I need to do something, anything, to prove I am not just useless." The words hit Warren harder than he expected. He sat down across from her, searching for the right thing to say. "You are not useless. You survived. You buried your family, tried to save your home, and when you realized you could not, you had the sense and strength to leave and find help. That is not useless, Miss Richardson. That is brave." She looked up at him, and for a moment her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Then she blinked and they were gone, replaced by that fierce determination he had seen when he first caught her. "I still need to work. Please, let me do something." Warren sighed. He understood stubborn. He was stubborn himself. "Fine. When you can stand for more than 5 minutes without looking like you are going to faint, you can start helping, but not before." It took another week before Faye had the strength to do real work. Warren started her on light tasks, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, helping with meal preparation. She attacked each job with an intensity that worried him. It was like she was trying to prove something, not just to him but to herself. Miguel, who had been with Warren for 3 years, watched this with amusement. "She works like she is running from something," he observed one evening as they tended the horses. "Maybe she is," Warren said. "Grief can chase a person harder than any bounty hunter." As the days turned into weeks, Faye grew stronger. The sunburn faded, her hands healed, and the hollows in her cheeks filled out. She was pretty. Warren realized one morning when she came in from feeding the chickens with her hair tied back and color in her face. The thought made him uncomfortable. He had not looked at a woman that way in a long time. By June, Faye was doing real ranch work. She proved to be a natural with horses, patient and gentle but firm. Warren's mare, Luna, who barely tolerated Miguel, would eat out of Faye's hand and follow her around the paddock like a loyal dog. "You have a way with them," Warren said, watching Faye brush Luna down after a ride. "My father bred horses back home. I grew up around them." Faye's voice was still sad when she mentioned her family, but the sharp edge of fresh grief had dulled somewhat. "He taught me everything. How to read their moods, how to earn their trust. Horses are honest. They do not pretend to feel something they do not." Warren leaned against the fence, considering that. "Unlike people." "Unlike people," Faye agreed. She finished with Luna and turned to face Warren. "I want to thank you again for taking me in. I know I have said it before, but I mean it. You saved my life." "You would have made it to town," Warren said, though he was not sure that was true. She had been in bad shape when she arrived. Maybe. Maybe not. Faye walked over to the fence, standing a few feet from him. Either way, you did not have to help me. Most men would not have. A strange woman riding up alone, half dead with no money and no prospects. You could have pointed me toward town and washed your hands of me, but you did not. What kind of man would I be if I did that? Warren said, feeling heat rise to his face. Compliments made him uncomfortable. An ordinary one. Faye smiled, and Warren realized it was the first real smile he had seen from her. It transformed her whole face, making her look younger, lighter. You are not ordinary, Warren Fletcher. She walked away before he could respond, leaving him standing at the fence with his heart doing something strange and unfamiliar in his chest. Summer settled over Montana, hot and bright. The ranch work was endless. Mending fences, tending livestock, managing the small vegetable garden, breaking in new horses. Faye worked alongside Warren and Miguel from dawn until dusk, never complaining, never asking for special treatment. She had a quick mind and learned fast. Within a month, she could rope a calf almost as well as Miguel, who had been doing it since childhood, in the evenings, after the work was done and Miguel had gone to his small cabin on the far side of the property. Warren and Faye would sit on the porch and watch the sun set behind the mountains. These were the times Warren looked forward to most, though he would not have admitted it out loud. They would talk about small things, the weather, the horses, plans for the next day. Sometimes Faye would tell stories about growing up on her family's homestead, and Warren could hear the love and loss woven through every word. Other times, Warren would talk about the ranch, how he had bought it 5 years ago with money saved from years of working cattle drives, how he had built it up slowly from nothing. Did you always want to ranch? Faye asked one evening in late July, as the sky turned pink and gold. No, Warren admitted. I wanted to be a lot of things when I was younger, a soldier, an explorer, a businessman, but I spent my 20s drifting from job to job, never quite settling into anything. Then I worked my first cattle drive and something clicked. I liked the work, the simplicity of it. Just you, the animals, and the land. No politics, no games. After a few years, I realized I wanted my own place, somewhere I could build something permanent. So I saved every penny I made, barely spent anything, and when I had enough, I bought this land. Do you ever regret it? Faye asked. Choosing this life. It is hard work and you are out here mostly alone. Warren thought about that. Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if I had made different choices. But regret? No, this ranch is mine. I built it with my own hands. That means something. Faye nodded slowly. I understand that. My father felt the same way about our homestead. It was not much, but it was ours. He worked himself to the bone to keep it going. Her voice dropped. And in the end, it did not matter. Disease does not care how hard you work or how much you love something. I am sorry, Warren said. About your family, I know I have said it before, but I mean it. I know you do. Faye looked over at him, and in the fading light her eyes were soft. You are a good man, Warren Fletcher, better than you think you are. Warren did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. August brought a heat wave that had everyone moving slowly and seeking shade whenever possible. The work still needed doing, but they started earlier in the mornings and took longer breaks in the afternoons when the sun was at its worst. One particularly hot day, Warren and Faye were working on replacing a section of the barn roof that had been damaged in a storm. The work was miserable in the heat, and by midday they were both drenched in sweat. We should take a break, Warren said, climbing down from the roof. It is too hot to be up there safely. Faye climbed down after him, wiping sweat from her forehead with her sleeve. There is a creek about half a mile east. We could go cool off there. Warren hesitated. The idea of spending time alone with Faye, away from the ranch and the work, felt dangerous somehow. Over the past few months, his feelings for her had grown into something he could not quite name. It was not just attraction, though he was attracted to her. It was something deeper, a sense of rightness when she was around, like a piece of his life had clicked into place without him realizing it was missing. But Faye was looking at him expectantly, and he could not think of a good reason to say no. "All right, let me tell Miguel where we are going." The creek was running low in the summer heat, but there was still enough water to cool off in. They sat on the bank and soaked their feet, letting the water run over their ankles. It was blissfully cold. "I have been thinking," Faye said after a while, "about what comes next." Warren felt something tighten in his chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I have been here for 3 months now. You took me in when I had nothing, gave me food and shelter and work. But I cannot stay here forever as just a ranch hand. I need to figure out what I am going to do with my life." "You are doing fine here," Warren said, trying to keep his voice casual. "You are good at the work. The ranch runs better with you helping." "That is kind of you to say. But this is your ranch, Warren, your dream. I need to find my own." Faye pulled her feet out of the water and hugged her knees to her chest. "I have been thinking maybe I could try to find work in town. Maybe as a seamstress or a cook, save up some money, eventually buy my own place, though it would be something small. A little house, maybe a few chickens." The thought of Faye leaving made Warren feel like he had been punched in the stomach, but what could he say? She was right. She could not work his ranch forever without any plan for the future. "If that is what you want," he made himself say. "I do not know what I want," Faye admitted. "That is the problem. For the first time in my life, I do not have a clear path forward. My whole life was supposed to be helping my family with the homestead, maybe eventually marrying someone from one of the neighboring properties, raising children. Now all of that is gone. I have to figure out who I am and what I want when none of it exists anymore." Warren looked at her, at the way the sunlight caught in her hair, at the sadness in her eyes. "You do not have to figure it all out right now," he said. "You have time." "Do I?" Faye looked at him. "I am 23 years old with no family, no property, no real prospects. In another few years I will be considered an old maid. Maybe I already am." "That is ridiculous," Warren said with more force than he intended. "You are young and smart and capable. Any man would be lucky to have you." Faye smiled sadly. "That is sweet of you to say. But you do not have to make me feel better. I know what my situation is." "I am not trying to make you feel better. I am telling you the truth." Warren met her eyes. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met. You have survived things that would have broken most people. And you have not let it make you bitter or mean. That is worth more than property or prospects or any of the other things you think you are supposed to have." Faye stared at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression, a softness that had not been there before. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more to me than you know." They sat there for a while longer, not talking, just listening to the sound of the creek and the birds in the trees. Warren wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that he did not want her to leave, that the thought of her not being on the ranch made him feel empty. But the words would not come. He had never been good with feelings, never known how to put them into words that made sense. When they finally headed back to the ranch, the afternoon sun still high and hot, Warren could not shake the feeling that something had changed between them. He just was not sure what. September came, bringing cooler weather and the beginning of harvest season. There was plenty of work to keep everyone busy, but Warren found his mind wandering at odd moments, usually to thoughts of Faye. He would catch himself watching her work, admiring the efficient way she moved, the concentration on her face when she was focused on a task. Miguel noticed, of course. One evening when they were alone in the barn, he said, "You should tell her how you feel." Warren nearly dropped the saddle he was holding. "What are you talking about? The woman. Faye, you care for her. Anyone with eyes can see it." Miguel grinned. "Why do you not tell her?" "Because it is not that simple," Warren said, feeling his face heat up. "She works for me. I gave her shelter when she had nowhere else to go. If I tell her how I feel, she might think she has to return those feelings out of obligation or gratitude. That would not be fair to her." "Or," Miguel said, "she might feel the same way and you are both dancing around each other like fools." "You do not know that," Warren muttered. "I do not know for certain, no, but I have eyes. I see how she looks at you when you are not paying attention. That is not the look of someone who feels obligated. That is something else." Warren wanted to believe him, but fear held him back. What if he was wrong? What if he told Faye how he felt and she did not feel the same way? It would ruin everything. She would feel uncomfortable, probably leave. He would lose not just his feelings for her, but her presence in his life entirely. That felt like too big a risk. But as the days passed, Warren found it harder and harder to keep his feelings hidden. Little things kept happening that made his heart ache. Faye would smile at him over breakfast, and he would want to reach across the table and take her hand. She would stand close to him while they worked, and he would catch her scent, something like sun and sage and something uniquely her, and it would make him dizzy. One evening in late September, they were sitting on the porch as usual when Faye said, "I got a letter from the land office today." Warren felt his stomach drop. What did it say? "They have finally finished processing the estate. Since I was my father's only surviving heir, the homestead is officially mine, or what is left of it anyway." Faye's voice was flat. "They are asking if I want to keep it or sell it." "What do you want to do?" Warren asked, though he dreaded the answer. Faye was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know if I can go back there. Every inch of that land has memories. My mother hanging laundry, my brother chasing chickens, my father working in the fields. How do I live in a place that is full of ghosts?" "You could sell it," Warren suggested carefully. "Use the money to start fresh somewhere else." "I could." Faye pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "But it feels like a betrayal somehow. That land was everything to my father. Selling it feels like admitting that his life's work meant nothing." "That is not true," Warren said firmly. "Your father's life meant something because of who he was, not because of a piece of land. If keeping the homestead causes you pain, I do not think he would want that." Faye looked over at him. "You are probably right. But knowing something logically and feeling it are two different things." "I know." Warren hesitated, then said, "You do not have to decide right away. Take your time. Think about what you really want." "What I really want," Faye repeated softly, looking out at the darkening sky. "I am not sure I know anymore." Warren wanted to ask her what she meant, wanted to push the conversation further, but something in her expression stopped him. She looked vulnerable, uncertain, and he did not want to make it worse by pressing. October arrived with the first frost. The work on the ranch shifted to preparing for winter, storing hay, reinforcing buildings, making sure all the animals were healthy and strong enough to survive the cold months ahead. It was during this time that trouble came to Hamilton. A gang of cattle rustlers had been operating in the area, hitting ranches and small homesteads under cover of darkness. Warren had heard rumors but had not worried too much. His ranch was small, and he did not have enough cattle to be a tempting target. But he underestimated their desperation. It happened on a cold night in mid-October. Warren woke to the sound of cattle lowing in distress and men's voices shouting. He grabbed his rifle and ran outside to find 3 men trying to drive his small herd through the open gate. "Hey," Warren shouted, "get away from those cattle." The men turned and one of them drew a gun. Warren dove behind a water trough as a shot rang out, splintering the wood of the barn behind where he had been standing. His heart was pounding, adrenaline making everything sharp and clear. Another shot, this one from a different direction. Warren looked up to see Faye standing on the porch with his old shotgun, aiming at the rustlers. She fired again, and one of the men yelped and grabbed his arm. "The next one is not a warning," Faye shouted. The rustlers looked at each other, then at the two armed people, and apparently decided it was not worth it. They ran for their horses and rode off into the darkness, leaving Warren's cattle milling around confused but unharmed. Warren stood up slowly, his legs shaking. Miguel came running from his cabin, rifle in hand. "Is everyone all right?" "We are fine," Warren said. "They are gone." Faye lowered the shotgun and Warren saw that her hands were trembling. He walked over to her quickly. "Are you hurt?" "No, I am fine. I just heard the noise and grabbed the gun and—" She stopped, taking a shaky breath. "I do not even know if I hit anyone. I was aiming over their heads." "You hit one of them in the arm," Warren said. "I saw him grab it." "Oh God." Faye sat down heavily on the porch steps. "I shot someone." "You saved the cattle, maybe saved me too." Warren sat down beside her. "That was brave and stupid. You could have been killed. So could you?" Faye looked at him, and in the moonlight her eyes were wide and frightened. "When I heard those shots and saw you dive behind the trough, I thought I could not let anything happen to you." The way she said it made Warren's heart stop. There was something in her voice, in her eyes, that went beyond friendship or gratitude. Before he could second-guess himself, before fear could stop him, he reached out and took her hand. "Faye," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at him. "What?" "I know the timing is terrible. We were just shot at, and you are probably in shock, and this is the worst possible moment. But I have to say it because life is short and unpredictable, and if something had happened tonight—" He took a breath. "I care about you, more than I should, more than is probably appropriate given that you work for me and I gave you shelter, and there is all this complicated history between us. But I cannot keep pretending I do not feel this way. You are the first thing I think about in the morning and the last thing I think about at night. When you talked about leaving, it felt like someone was tearing something out of my chest. I do not want you to leave. I do not want you to go to town and find other work and buy your own little house with chickens. I want you to stay here with me, not as a ranch hand but as—" He trailed off, not quite able to say the word. Faye was staring at him, her mouth slightly open. "Warren." "You do not have to say anything," Warren said quickly, suddenly terrified. "I know this is a lot, and if you do not feel the same way, we can pretend I never said anything. You can stay working here as long as you want, and I will never bring it up again. I promise." "Warren," Faye said again, more firmly this time, "stop talking." He stopped. Faye squeezed his hand. "I feel the same way." Warren was sure he had heard her wrong. "What?" "I said I feel the same way." A smile was spreading across her face, tentative but real. "I have felt this way for weeks now, maybe longer, but I did not think you could possibly feel the same. You are this strong, capable man who built a ranch from nothing. And I am just someone who showed up half dead on your doorstep. I did not think I had anything to offer you." "You have everything to offer," Warren said, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "You are smart and brave and kind. You work harder than anyone I have ever met. You make me laugh. You make me want to be better. That night when you talked about leaving, I wanted to beg you to stay, but I did not know how without making you feel obligated." "I would not have felt obligated," Faye said softly. "I would have felt relieved, because the thought of leaving here, of leaving you, made me feel empty. This ranch has become more of a home to me in 3 months than anywhere I have lived, and that is because of you." They sat there on the porch steps, holding hands, looking at each other like they were seeing something for the first time. Warren wanted to kiss her so badly it hurt, but he was not sure if it was the right moment. Faye made the decision for him. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, soft and tentative. Warren's whole world narrowed down to that single point of contact, sweet and perfect. He cupped her face in his free hand, kissing her back, trying to pour everything he felt into that moment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Warren rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Please stay." "Yes," Faye whispered back. "Yes, I will stay." Miguel cleared his throat loudly, reminding them he was still there. "Should I go report the rustlers to the sheriff in the morning?" Warren laughed, feeling giddy and light. "Yes, thank you, Miguel." Miguel grinned and headed back to his cabin, shaking his head. Warren and Faye sat on the porch until dawn, talking and kissing and making plans. They decided to keep Faye's homestead for now, but rent it to a young family who needed land. That way it would not sit empty, but Faye would not have to go back there if she did not want to. Warren would teach her everything about running the ranch so it could truly be theirs together. Eventually, when enough time had passed, they would get married. "How much time do you think is appropriate?" Faye asked, her head resting on Warren's shoulder as the sun started to lighten the eastern sky. "I have no idea," Warren admitted. "I have never courted anyone before. I do not know the rules." "Neither do I," Faye laughed. "I suppose we will figure it out together." The next few months were the happiest of Warren's life. He and Faye worked the ranch together during the day and spent the evening sitting close on the porch or inside by the fire when it got too cold. They talked about everything, their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Warren learned that Faye could speak a little Spanish, taught to her by a neighboring family at her old homestead. Faye learned that Warren had a terrible singing voice but would hum while he worked, usually the same 3 songs over and over. In November, Warren rode into town and bought a ring from the jeweler. It was simple, just a small gold band, but it was all he could afford. He was not even sure how to propose properly. His own parents had died when he was young, and he had not been around many married couples to know what was expected. He decided to ask Miguel for advice. "How do men usually propose?" Miguel looked amused. "Usually they ask the woman's father for permission first." "Her father is dead," Warren said. "Then you just ask her. Get down on one knee if you want to be traditional about it." Warren practiced in the barn when he was alone, feeling ridiculous but determined to get it right. He would kneel, pull out the ring, and say something meaningful. But every time he tried to come up with the right words, his mind went blank. Finally, he decided to just speak from the heart and hope it was enough. He chose a night in early December when the first snow had fallen, making everything clean and white. They were sitting by the fire after dinner, and Warren could feel the ring in his pocket like it weighed 100 pounds. "Faye," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. She looked over at him. "Yes." Warren stood up, then knelt in front of her chair before he could lose his nerve. Faye's eyes went wide. "I am not good with words," Warren started. "I never have been. But I need you to know that you have changed my life in every way that matters. Before you came here, this ranch was just a place I worked. Now it is a home. You make me want to be better, to do more, to build something that lasts. I love you, Faye Richardson. I think I have loved you since the day you told me you were not useless. Will you marry me?" He pulled out the ring, his hand shaking slightly. Faye had tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Warren slipped the ring onto her finger and she pulled him up and kissed him hard. They held each other by the firelight, and Warren felt a sense of completion he had never experienced before. This was what he had been building toward his whole life without knowing it. They were married in January 1879, in a small ceremony at the church in Hamilton. Miguel stood as Warren's witness, and the minister's wife stood for Faye. It was simple and short, but when Warren said his vows, looking into Faye's eyes, he meant every word with his whole being. They spent their wedding night in the ranch house, which now truly belonged to both of them. Warren had moved Faye's things into his room the week before, and it had felt right to see her belongings mixed with his, like two lives becoming one. "I never thought I would get to feel this happy again," Faye whispered in the darkness, her head on Warren's chest. "After I lost my family, I thought that part of my life was over, that I would just survive but never really live. You gave me my life back." "We gave each other our lives," Warren said, running his fingers through her hair. "I was just existing before you came here. Now I am living." The winter was hard, as Montana winters always were, but Warren and Faye weathered it together. They spent long evenings by the fire, planning for the spring, talking about what they wanted to do with the ranch with their lives. Faye wanted to expand the horse breeding operation, use her father's knowledge to create a small but respected herd. Warren wanted to add more cattle, slowly building up the ranch's profitability. In February, Faye told Warren she was pregnant. He was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. They had talked about children, of course, but the reality of it was overwhelming. "What if I am a terrible father?" Warren asked, pacing the kitchen. "I barely remember my own parents. What do I know about raising a child?" "The same amount I know about being a mother," Faye said calmly. "We will figure it out together, just like we figure out everything else." She was right, of course. They did figure it out together. Faye had terrible morning sickness through March and April, but Warren learned to cook decent meals that would not make her ill. He took over the heavier ranch work, insisting that she rest more. Faye hated being sidelined but compromised by handling the lighter tasks and the bookkeeping, which Warren had always neglected. In May, Faye's belly was starting to round out, and Warren found himself talking to it when they were alone. "Your mother is the strongest person I know," he would say. "You are lucky to have her. I am lucky to have her. We are all lucky." Faye would laugh and run her fingers through his hair. "You are going to be a wonderful father." The baby came in September, a boy with dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. They named him Thomas, after Faye's father. Warren cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed by the weight of this tiny life that depended on him. "Hello, Thomas," he whispered. "Welcome to the ranch." The first few months were exhausting. Thomas was a colicky baby who rarely slept for more than an hour at a time. Warren and Faye took turns walking him around the house, rocking him, singing to him. Warren's terrible singing voice somehow worked wonders, and Thomas would often quiet when Warren hummed his 3 favorite songs. "I think he has terrible taste in music," Faye said one night, watching Warren pace with the baby. "He has excellent taste," Warren countered. "He knows quality when he hears it." Despite the exhaustion, Warren had never been happier. Watching Faye with their son, seeing the fierce love in her eyes when she looked at Thomas, made his heart feel too big for his chest. His family had grown from 1 to 3, and the ranch house that had once been too quiet now rang with the sounds of life. As Thomas grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. Faye's horse breeding program started to gain a reputation in the area, and buyers would come from as far as Billings to look at her stock. Warren expanded the cattle operation, and between the two of them, they were making enough to save money for the first time. When Thomas was 2, Faye got pregnant again. This time, she had an easier pregnancy, and in spring of 1882, they welcomed a daughter. They named her Clara, after Warren's mother. She was the opposite of her brother, a calm, easy baby who slept through the night almost immediately. "I do not trust it," Faye said, watching Clara sleep peacefully in her cradle. "No baby is this easy." "Maybe we just got lucky this time," Warren said, though he was suspicious too. It turned out Clara was just genuinely an easy baby. She grew into a sweet, thoughtful child who was fascinated by everything around her. Thomas, meanwhile, was full of energy and mischief, always getting into things he should not. Together, they kept Warren and Faye busy from sunrise to sunset. By 1884, the ranch was well established. Warren had built additions onto the house to accommodate their growing family. They had 3 hired hands now in addition to Miguel, who had become like family. The cattle herd had tripled in size, and Faye's horses were sought after throughout Montana. One evening in late summer, after the children were in bed, Warren and Faye sat on the porch like they used to when they were first falling in love. The view was the same: mountains in the distance, sky turning pink and gold, the sounds of cattle and horses settling down for the night. But everything else had changed. "You ever think about that day you rode up to the ranch?" Warren asked, taking Faye's hand. "All the time," Faye said. "I think about how close I came to just giving up, lying down in the sun somewhere and letting nature take its course. I was so tired, so grief-stricken, I did not think I had anything left to live for." "I am glad you kept going," Warren said quietly. "So am I." Faye squeezed his hand. "You saved me, Warren, in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Warren corrected. "I was just going through the motions before you came here. I had the ranch, but I did not have a reason for any of it. You gave me that reason. You and Thomas and Clara, you are my whole world." Faye leaned over and kissed him softly. "And you are mine." All those months of grief and loss and suffering, they led me here. To you, to this life. I would go through all of it again if I knew this was waiting at the end. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out. Inside the house, one of the children called out in their sleep, and Faye stood to go check on them. Warren watched her go, his heart full of love and gratitude. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. Thomas grew into a strong, capable boy who loved working with the cattle. Clara developed her mother's gift with horses and could ride almost before she could walk. In 1886, Faye gave birth to another son, James, who had his father's serious demeanor and his mother's fierce determination. The ranch continued to prosper. Warren and Faye worked hard, reinvesting their profits into improving the land and the stock. They weathered hard winters and dry summers, disease and predators, all the challenges that came with ranching in Montana. But they weathered them together, as a team. In 1888, when Thomas was 9, he asked Warren to teach him to rope cattle. Warren spent hours in the paddock with his son, showing him the technique, correcting his form, praising his progress. Watching Thomas finally lasso his first calf successfully, Warren felt a sense of pride and continuity. This ranch would continue after he was gone. His children would carry it forward. That same year, Faye received a letter from the family renting her old homestead. They had saved up enough money to buy their own land and would be moving on. Did Faye want to sell the property or find new renters? Faye brought the letter to Warren. "What do you think we should do?" Warren considered. "What do you want to do?" "I think I want to let it go," Faye said slowly. "That part of my life is over. It is time to stop holding on to it. Maybe we could sell it to a young couple just starting out, the way my parents were when they first claimed that land. Let it be the beginning of someone else's dream." Warren nodded. "That sounds right." They sold the homestead to a young couple from Iowa, newly married and full of hope and plans. Faye used the money to build a bigger stable for her horses, and Warren added more pasture land to the ranch. The past was finally, fully, laid to rest. In 1890, Clara asked her mother to teach her everything about breeding horses. Faye began taking her daughter with her everywhere, explaining bloodlines and conformation, teaching her to recognize quality animals and avoid problem ones. Clara was a dedicated student, asking questions constantly, absorbing everything. "She is better at this than I was at her age," Faye told Warren one night. "She has a natural instinct for it." "She learned from the best," Warren said, pulling his wife close. The ranch had gone from a place where a dying woman sought shelter to a thriving operation that employed a dozen people and supported multiple families. Warren and Faye had built something that mattered, something that would last. But more than that, they had built a life together, full of love and purpose and meaning. In early 1892, Faye discovered she was pregnant again. At 37, she had not expected to have more children, but both she and Warren were happy about it. This pregnancy was harder than the others, and Faye had to rest more, but in September she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Rose, and she was the darling of the whole family. Thomas, now 13, was surprisingly gentle with his baby sister. Clara, at 10, appointed herself Rose's guardian and protector. And James, at 6, was fascinated by the tiny person who had joined their family. Warren held Rose in his arms on her first night home, marveling at how something so small could contain so much promise. "Your mother and I built this ranch for you," he whispered to her. "For all of you. So you would always have a home, always have a place where you belong. Do not ever forget that you are loved." Rose yawned and fell asleep, trusting and safe. The years continued to roll by, marked by small moments and big milestones. Thomas learning to break in his first horse, Clara winning a prize at the county fair for one of her mother's colts, James learning to read and insisting on reading every book he could get his hands on, Rose taking her first steps, saying her first words, growing from a baby into a bright, curious toddler. Warren's hair started to go gray at the temples. Faye's hands developed calluses and permanent dirt under the nails from years of ranch work. But they were both healthy and strong, and they loved each other more with each passing year. The passion of their early days together had mellowed into something deeper, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. In 1895, Thomas turned 16 and asked Warren if he could start working the ranch full-time instead of going to school. Warren and Faye discussed it at length. Education was important, but so was having a son who knew and loved the ranch. "Let him do it," Faye said finally. "He is not going to be a scholar. His heart is here, with the land and the animals. Let him follow his passion the way we followed ours." So Thomas left school and became a full partner in the ranch operations. He was good at it, with an instinct for cattle that reminded Warren of himself at that age. Father and son worked side by side, and Warren taught Thomas everything he knew about ranching, about business, about being a man. "Always treat people fairly," Warren told his son one day as they mended a fence together. "Your word is your bond. If you say you are going to do something, do it, and take care of the people who work for you. A ranch is only as good as the people who work it." Thomas listened carefully, taking it all in. "I want to make you proud," he said. "You already do," Warren assured him. "Every single day." Clara, meanwhile, had taken over most of the horse breeding operation. At 13, she had an eye for bloodlines and conformation that rivaled her mother's. She was also developing a head for business, negotiating with buyers in a way that impressed even Warren. "That daughter of ours is going to be running this whole ranch someday," Warren told Faye one night. "I know," Faye said, smiling, "and she is going to be brilliant at it." In 1897, when Warren was 43 and Faye was 42, they celebrated their 18th wedding anniversary. It seemed impossible that so much time had passed. Warren still remembered the day he caught Faye as she fell from her horse like it was yesterday. He remembered the way she had looked at him on the porch after they drove off the rustlers. He remembered their wedding day, the births of their children, all the small moments that had made up their life together. 18 years, Faye said, leaning against him as they watched the sunset. It went so fast. And so slow, Warren said. Every day with you feels like a gift, but when I look back, it all seems to have happened in a blink. Do you have any regrets? Faye asked. Warren thought about that. No, not a single one. Not one, Faye said firmly. This life, this ranch, our children, it is everything I never knew I wanted, more than I ever dreamed of having. They kissed as the sun dipped below the mountains, turning the sky brilliant shades of orange and purple. Inside the house, they could hear their children arguing about something, the sounds of a family living their lives. It was perfect. The ranch continued to grow. By 1898, they had expanded their holdings to include more pasture land and had bought out a neighboring property when the owner retired. Thomas was now running much of the day-to-day cattle operations. Clara had established the ranch's horse breeding program as one of the best in Montana. James, at 12, was showing an interest in the business side of things, learning bookkeeping and negotiation. And Rose, at 6, was still young but showed signs of being the most headstrong of all the children. Warren and Faye had built something that would last beyond their lifetimes. The ranch would continue through their children and eventually their grandchildren. It was a legacy of hard work and love, built from nothing by two people who had found each other when they both needed saving. On a spring day in 1899, Warren and Faye were working in the horse paddock together. The work was second nature now after so many years. They moved around each other with practiced ease, each knowing what the other needed without words. I have been thinking, Faye said, brushing down one of the mares. We should throw a big party for the 20th anniversary next year. Invite everyone from town, all the neighboring ranchers, everyone who has been part of our lives. That sounds nice, Warren said. Though I am not sure I want that many people around, Faye laughed. You have gotten more social over the years. You barely leave the ranch. Because everything I need is right here, Warren said simply. Why would I go anywhere else? Faye walked over to him and kissed his cheek. That is sweet, but I still think we should have the party. Then we will have the party, Warren agreed. He would give Faye anything she wanted. After 20 years of marriage, that had not changed. They planned the party for their anniversary in January 1900. It would mark not just 20 years of marriage, but also the turn of a new century. A new beginning, even as they looked back on everything they had built. The party was held on a cold but clear January day. It seemed like half of Montana showed up. The house and barn were packed with people eating, drinking, dancing, and celebrating. Thomas and Clara helped serve food while James tried to keep Rose from eating too much cake. Miguel, now in his 50s, told stories about the early days of the ranch that had everyone laughing. Warren stood with Faye in the middle of it all, watching their friends and family celebrate, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Thank you, he said to Faye, loud enough to be heard over the noise. For what? Faye asked. For saying yes when I asked you to stay, for building this life with me, for our children, for this ranch, for everything. Thank you for choosing me. Faye's eyes filled with tears. I did not choose you, Warren. We chose each other. And I would make that choice 1,000 times over. They danced together as someone played a fiddle, moving slowly among their guests. Warren was not a good dancer, never had been, but with Faye in his arms, it did not matter. They moved together like they did everything else, as a team, as partners, as two people who had become one. As the party wound down and guests started leaving, Warren and Faye stood on the porch, waving goodbye. The children were inside cleaning up, their voices and laughter filtering out through the windows. The ranch spread out before them in the moonlight, solid and real and permanent. "We did all right," Faye said, taking Warren's hand. "We did better than all right," Warren corrected. "We built something beautiful." They stood there together, the woman who had ridden up to the ranch half dead and desperate, and the man who had given her shelter. Neither of them could have known on that hot day in 1878 what they would build together. A ranch, a family, a life that mattered. They had saved each other and, in doing so, had created something worth saving. The years ahead would bring more challenges, more changes. Children would grow up and start their own lives. The ranch would continue to evolve. But through it all, Warren and Faye would face it together, just as they had faced everything since that first day. In 1902, Thomas married a girl from town, and they built a house on the far end of the ranch property. In 1904, they had Warren and Faye's first grandchild, a boy they named Warren after his grandfather. Warren wept when he held his namesake, overcome with the continuation of everything he and Faye had built. Clara married in 1906, a horse trader from Billings who respected her knowledge and business sense. They stayed on the ranch, taking over more of the horse operation. James went to college in Missoula, studying business, but came back to help run the ranch's financial side. Rose, the baby, grew into a fierce, independent young woman who insisted on learning every aspect of ranching, from cattle to horses to bookkeeping. Warren and Faye aged gracefully, their hair going white, their faces lined from years of sun and wind and hard work. But they were still strong, still active, still deeply in love. On their 30th anniversary in 1909, they sat on the porch as they had done countless times before. 30 years, Warren said, shaking his head. "I cannot believe it has been that long." "It has gone fast," Faye agreed. "But every year has been a blessing." They had 4 children, 7 grandchildren now with more on the way. The ranch was thriving, passed down to the next generation but still guided by Warren and Faye's experience and wisdom. They had built something that would last, a legacy of love and hard work. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Faye asked. "When I told you I could not just stay without paying my way." "I said you were not a charity case," Warren recalled. "You said we would figure out the rest when I was not half dead." Faye smiled. "We figured it out, did we not?" "We did," Warren agreed. "We figured out everything together." As the sun set on their 30th anniversary, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, Warren pulled Faye close. They had weathered drought and harsh winters, loss and hardship, all the challenges that came with building a life on the frontier. But they had done it together, as partners, as lovers, as best friends. The woman who had worked his ranch for shelter had become his whole world. And the man who had worked up the courage to ask her to stay forever had gotten everything he never knew he wanted. Together, they had built not just a ranch but a home, not just a family but a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. The stars came out one by one, the same stars that had watched over them for 3 decades. Warren and Faye sat together on the porch of the ranch house, holding hands, watching the night settle over the land they loved. They had lived a good life, a full life, a life worth living. And it had all started with a desperate woman seeking shelter and a lonely man finding the courage to offer her more than just a place to stay. He had offered her forever, and she had accepted, and together they had made that forever into something beautiful.